Okay, looks like we're live streaming now. Welcome to our Thursday night Bible study. We apologize for I apologize for my tardiness. Uh, Now, I'm going to introduce a new face, hopefully, to the study. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, good evening. My name is Viana Joseph.
Okay. Viana, is that's how you pronounce your name, Viana?
Yes.
Okay. That's a pretty name. Um, uh, do you have a nickname?
OV.
V. Okay, so I'll just call you V, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Okay. But before we enter into our study of today, and it's going to be a continuation of basically what we've been studying thus far, except that we're going to look at the other principle of the two horns that we've been studying. Instead of focusing on republicanism like were the two studies before, we'll be touching on Protestantism. But before we do that, we'll open up with prayer. V, would you be so kind to open us up with prayer?
Yes, thank you. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for bringing us all here this evening. Please forgive me and all of us of our sins, Lord. And please give us wisdom and guidance, and please bless us and help us to be able to learn and teach the viewers something new. And Lord, please help us to be able to reach the people that have questions that they want answered, that they haven't really had the opportunity to have answered until tonight. Please inspire the both of us to be able to help others to have a better understanding on your word, and let your will be done. Thank you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, V. Um, Let me get this thing up and running. Okay. Okay, no, that's not what we're looking for. Um, let's see. Okay, yeah, that's what we're looking for. See. Okay. So many slides, but we're only gonna go through a few. Okay, let's see. Okay, a little bit of review we're gonna touch on today, and we're gonna add a little bit of something new. Okay, alrighty. So our we're gonna touch on a, and this is we're just dealing with a different side of the same topic. Um, but we're gonna do a little well, not a sketch per se of the history of the United States. We could do that, but I'm not going to do that for this one. But we will be dealing with Rome and the United States, and because there's a lot to learn from Rome, not just papal Rome, like some students of Bible prophecy often veers towards when they hear the word Rome, but also pagan Rome or the Roman Republic, because the first human republic to ever exist was Rome. And the second human republic to ever exist in all of human history um, is the United States of America. And so there is a lesson to be learned with Rome that we actually touched on a bit in the previous 2 weeks, but we're going to touch on a different side this week. Okay, all right, and so um, Our main text we'll be looking at, obviously, I think you've already seen it, or those who have already seen it on screen, um, is Revelation 13:11. Okay. And this is touching, and we've touched on this before. We touched on what a beast means in prophecy, but we'll do a little short review on that, and so to make sure that we're up on the same page. But the verse says, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon." Okay, all right. So um, before we touch on the two horns, I'm just going to touch on what a beast represents in prophecy. If you look in Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 3, Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 3, I'm just going to read it directly from the Bible so we can see what beast represents in prophecy. All right. And Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. V, if you're there, would you be so kind to read those verses?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other.
Okay. So four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from another. We're not gonna look at the four beasts for the sake of time right now, but we're just trying to find out what does beast represent in prophecy. Would you read verse 17 of Daniel chapter 7?
Verse 17 of Daniel chapter 3?
7.
Oh, 7. Yes. Verse 17 says, Those great beasts, which are four, those great beasts, which are four kings, which arise out of the earth.
Okay. So that's Daniel chapter 7. It says, verse 17, it says that they are kings, but to more specifically understand what they are, the Bible gives us an added understanding in verse 23. Would you read verse 23, V?
Verse 23 says, found it. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms.
Okay. Okay, so notice this. It says the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom. So if the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom, then the third beast shall be the third
Kingdom.
The second beast shall be the second
Kingdom.
The first beast shall be the first
Kingdom.
So beast represents kingdom in prophecy. Okay? Beast represents kingdom in prophecy, without question. All right? And so when it says in the beast, and I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. This is speaking of a certain kingdom or nation. All right? All right? And in this case, obviously, it's obvious what the nation this is representing. It's in the title, but we'll delve into um, another feature of this nation, the United States of America, or this beast. It says this beast had two horns like a lamb, and let's check and see what horns represent in prophecy.
Excuse me?
Yes.
And it says that this beast should come out of the earth. What does the earth represent in biblical prophecy?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Let's look at now. It does say yes. It says, well, I want to note the difference. Well, there is a difference to be made. If you look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 3, we read about four great beasts that came up from the sea. The Bible tells us, okay? Diverse one from another. Okay. And if you look at, when you look at sea and you compare it to Genesis chapter 1, yes, Genesis chapter 1, the first chapter of the Bible. The Bible tells us specifically in verse 10 that seas are also called waters. Okay, in verse 10, it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 10, and God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. Okay, now, so first we'll look at what sea represents in prophecy, and then we'll look at what earth represents in prophecy.
Seas
Okay, so we'll
represent
make
nations, people.
ah, ah let's turn to Revelation chapter 17, verse 15. And V, would you be so kind to read Revelation chapter 17, verse 15?
Yes, thank you. Revelation chapter 15, 17.
Revelation chapter 17, verse 15.
Sorry. 17:15 says, Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues.
So waters, remember another word for waters, we just saw in Genesis chapter 1, verse 10, that another word for waters means seas. So it's speaking about sea waters is synonymous. So it's saying the waters of the seas which thou sawest where the whore sitteth. We're going to not focus on the whore right now. It says that the waters are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So it's a place that is densely populated. Okay, wherever this whore, whatever this whore represents, or whatever this whore sits, is sitting in a place that is densely populated and has been that way for some time. Now, when it speaks about, now this gives us a clue because earth is used in a different, of course, waters and seas represent peoples, kindreds, or peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So let's see what earth represents uh, in prophecy. Okay. Now, notice what it states here in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. We're going to see this from the Bible. Now, oftentimes this is not studied this way, but we can see it from the Bible. Notice what it states in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 concerning the earth, especially the first part of verse 2. Would you read it, V?
So Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the
Verses
beginning,
1. Yes.
God
Go ahead.
created the heavens and the earth. Verse 2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness
Ah,
was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters.
okay. Over the face of the waters. Now, notice this. It says that the earth was without form and what? And void. Now, a word void means empty. So, earth, and we're going to see another verse to verify this also. Earth, as opposed to waters that represents peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Earth is a place where the earth represents in prophecy a place where it is densely populated. Okay, a place that was densely populated. It doesn't mean that it was entirely empty, but basically compared to the seas, it was empty. Quite frankly, compared to the seas, but it's a place that is sparsely populated. Whereas, I'm sorry, I said densely, but sparsely populated. It's not a place that is has a lot of people in it, like waters does. So it's a place that is sparsely populated, not densely, but sparsely. For the waters, it's densely populated. Okay.
I
All
understand
right.
why you say that. I understand why you say that Earth represents a place that's sparsely populated because in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, the earth was without form and void. And there's a parallel between the emptiness and what the earth resembled and the place from which this beast comes out of. It comes out of something that's empty. And that's what the earth represents. And that's what you're saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. And see, now that's creation account. There's another account given from a prophetic lens, and this is speaking about something that is yet future. And I won't speak about exactly the specific event that it's referring to, but it also uses this term of the earth being without form and void, but it's not in the context of creation in this one. It's yet future, representing when the earth will be basically uh, empty. There will be no life on earth for a certain period of time. The Bible tells us. And if you look at Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23, and I have V read this verse in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23, this will help us understand what uh, earth means, because we want to have two witnesses. We want to make sure that we at least have two witnesses. But the Bible says, in the mouth of two or three witnesses, let every word be established. And so we're looking for that second witness. And here's that second witness in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23.
I beheld the earth, and indeed it was without form and void, and the heavens, they had no light.
So again, we see this ideal of the earth being without form and void or empty. And compared to the waters in prophecy, the earth is basically empty. It's sparsely populated. It's a sparsely populated area as opposed to a densely populated area as it applies to the seas of the waters. Okay. So yes.
My question is, are you saying that the origin of this particular beast has no origin like the others? Meaning it's this beast, you said beast represents nation, not nations. Water represents nations.
Yes. Yeah, beast represents nation or kingdom.
So if the beast represents nation or kingdom, then this kingdom is not, it's not created.
It's
not created like the others.
No, this nation, yes, it's that's correct. The other nations that we read about, or the beasts or the kingdoms that we read about, they came up out of the water. Every single one of them that you read about, they came up out of the water. Meaning that they arose out of a place that was previously densely populated with people. It was already with form. In other words, it was already developed, and people were living there. Okay. Whereas with this beast that we're reading about in Revelation chapter 13:11, specifically United States of America, it came to a region that was sparsely populated. Were there native Indians in this region? Absolutely. Okay. You may even say that so far as it pertains to the western part of the United States, if you really want to get into history, was it formerly, some of those territories were formerly owned by Mexicans? Yes, they were. Okay. Yes, they were. All right. But compared to where the other beasts that we haven't touched on arose out of, it was a very sparsely populated area compared to the other beasts that came up out of the waters. Okay. Is that clear? Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so moving forward to two horns like a lamb. We want to know what horns represent in prophecy, and we'll just go through this rather quickly. It says in Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. V, would you read though Daniel chapter 8, verses 1 and 2? Daniel chapter 8, verses 1 and 2.
Daniel chapter 8, verse 1 and 2. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel. After the one that appeared to me the first time, I saw the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Ulai. It's okay. It's okay as long as you try. All right. I pronounced it probably 5 different ways already myself, so don't worry about it. But the main focus is that he's in a vision here. Okay. Daniel is in a vision, and notice what the Bible tells us he sees in this vision. It says this: Then I, meaning Daniel, lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood between the river a ram. Remember, beast represents kingdom and prophecy. So this is dealing with a nation, a specific kind of nation. A ram which had two horns. So this ram had two horns, and the two horns were high, but the one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward. Skip down a few, and it says, and as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So now there's another kingdom, okay? And he came to the ram, which is a different kingdom, that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power, it says, okay, or strength. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler or anger against him, and smote or struck the ram, and break his two horns. And notice this, after he breaks the two horns, the very next thing it says, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, okay? But he cast and hurled him to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Okay, we'll go into a little bit of who these two beasts are. Okay, we're going to find out who they are. But for right now, we see that they represent, that these horns seem to represent power or strength. There's another example that we have on our second witness, actually in Habakkuk. And when you look in Habakkuk chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, and I'm just going to read verses 3 and 4 directly. And this is a prayer of Habakkuk. And he states this, he says, God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. And his brightness was as the lightning. He had horns coming out of his hand. And there, where the horns were coming out of his hands, was the hiding of his power. Okay, so obviously horns represent power or strength in prophecy. Okay, all right, and it can be manifested in different ways. Now, I said before that I was going to touch on who this ram is that had his two horns broken off, and the he-goat that had the notable horn. What does that represent? Well, let's look at Daniel chapter 8. And I believe it's verse 21. I want to say it's 20 and 21, I think it's 20 and 21. Would you care to read verses 20 and 21?
Of course, yes. Mm-hmm. So it says, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king.
So notice this. Horns, remember, they represent power, so they can these power can be manifested in different ways for every nation. Okay, so with the ram, it says, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of the Media and Persia. So there's two kingdoms, or these kingdoms are together. Okay, all right, it's one kingdom, and they're filled with a people called the Medians or the Medes and the Persians. Okay, today this area, the Medes and the Persians, is what we would know now as modern day Iran. Okay, modern day Iran. If even some of the inhabitants of Iran will call themselves Persians. Like, are you Persian? Yes, I'm Persian. Yes, yes, Iran. So Iran is the location geographically of the ancient kingdom of what we call the Medes and the Persians. Yes, they were formerly a world empire. All right. And then obviously you have verse 21, which speaks about the rough goat or the he-goat in the ancient kingdom of Greece, which actually became an empire. And it says the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. It's not talking about the first king of Grecian history. There were many kings before this king. But when it says the first king, it's speaking about when Greece stepped onto the stage as a world empire, not just merely a kingdom, not just merely a nation, but empire, meaning a king over kings, a king over other nations. And that person that ruled when Greece became when they first became an empire, but he had a very short life, was Alexander the Great. Okay, Alexander the Great was the individual who made Greece a world empire. He actually defeated a king by the name of Darius, the Emperor Darius, to become the next world empire. And then shortly thereafter, he died after he drank a lot of alcohol, he got severely sick, and he died from it at a very young age. Okay. And so he's called Alexander the Great. All right. Now, speaking of which, this leads us directly down to the main passage that we're addressing kind of today. In Daniel chapter 8. And I'm going to skip over a few of these things because I want us to see Daniel 8. Okay, yes. So Daniel 8, we're going to look at verses 20, 22, and then I'll begin in verse 23. V, would you read verse 22 because it's speaking about the Grecian Empire. After Alexander the Great dies, Greece is divided up into 4 different divisions. And this is represented in verse 22. Notice what it says. V, please.
Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power.
So notice this. It states in verse 21, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, or the king of Greece, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Then now after this first king dies, it says, now that being broken, because the first king died, whereas 4 stood up for it, meaning in the place of the great horn, you have 4 horns come up. And these 4 horns represent 4 kingdoms or 4 divisions that shall stand up out of the nation. The nation of who? The nation of Greece. But not in his home power, meaning, but not in his power, meaning not in the power of Alexander the Great or the first king. Okay. All right. And then it says this. This is the main verse passage that we're looking at. Daniel chapter 8, verse 23 and 25 to 25. It says, in the latter time of their kingdom, meaning Grecia, when the transgressors are come to a full, a king, and this is speaking of another a kingdom or a king or a kingdom, it says Rome, basically this is Rome, a fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Okay? Meaning it become the next world empire. Stand up, it signifies that they're arising, another empire is falling, and one is coming up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully or to a vast degree, and shall prosper in practice. And then it states this, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And then through his policy also shall he cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He, or Rome, basically shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. This part here is yet future. Okay? This part here is yet future. This last part that we just read is still yet future. Yes, go ahead.
Because this kingdom of Rome still exists today. Unlike the other kingdoms that have fallen, we're still living with the Rome kingdom right now, and it's going to be broken without hand, because in the dream that I think it was Belshazzar or Nebuchadnezzar, which one was it?
It was the dream for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and then Daniel interpreted it.
Yes. Okay, so when Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he was like, I'm so scared, somebody tell me what it means. And Daniel was like, I got you. I'm going to tell you what it means. I'm going to give you, the Lord is going to help me with an interpretation. So Daniel was like, this is what it means. Basically, these are all the kingdoms after yours that's going to come, right? But then the kingdom of God is going to be the very last kingdom. The kingdom of God represents the stone, and it comes and it breaks down everything. The golden image, the Roman Empire, we're still living under it. That's why in Italy right now, there's the Vatican City. It is literally a church and its own geographical location. And the Catholic Church still rules a lot of things, including governments here in America. And it's still something that's still prominent. And because God is going to destroy it himself, that is what it means to that it's going to be broken without hand.
Yes, yes, yes. So this is yet future. It's a yet future event, and maybe in another study we'll get more into the details. But this is definitely something that is yet future. And yes, we are living in the time of Rome. That is correct. But not this time. We're not living in the time of the ancient Roman Empire that formerly called itself a republic, but what we would call a different phase of Rome, which we call papal Rome. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. The ancient Roman Empire represented pagan Rome. We're living in another phase of time called papal Rome's time. Okay. And so that's absolutely correct. So now America, we're going to deal with the Roman Republic. We're still dealing with the Roman Republic, but we're also dealing with this principle of Protestantism. And anyway, remember when we touched on, before we go into that, remember when we touched on the two horns?
Yes.
And we found out that the horns represented what in prophecy?
Power.
Okay, notice this. What does these horns represent for the beast in Revelation 13, verse 11? Let's look at what these horns represent. Revelation. It says here in the Great Controversy, chapter 25, God's Immutable Law, page 441, paragraph 1. And this is directly from Revelation 13:11, this first quote here. And he had two horns like a lamb. Notice what it states here. The lamb-like horns indicate youth. Of course, it's a lamb-like. It's not sheep-like. It's lamb-like. Lamb is very young. Indicate youth, innocence, and gentleness. Absolutely. Fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophet as coming up in 1798. The Christian exiles who first fled to America sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance, and they determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. The Declaration of Independence sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith also granted, every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Then it says this, republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. What became the fundamental principles of the nation? Republicanism and Protestantism. It says these principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. Now, what it does not say, it doesn't say republicanism and Christianity. There's a difference, there's a slight difference to be made between Protestantism and Christianity, especially at a national level. When we speak about Protestantism, the crowning principle, the crowning national principle of Protestantism is the ideal of a complete separation between religion and the state. Protestantism says that the state, or Protestants stated that the state has nothing to do with a man or woman's faith. In matters of faith, the magistrate or any other civil official has nothing whatever to do. They have no authority in that area. That is what the ideal of this first principle of Protestantism applies. There is a second principle. We're not going to deal with that one right now. But the first one is, as it applies to the nation, is with this ideal of a separation between religion and the state. This is the reason why we have in the Constitution, we have something we call the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments. And amendment number 1 says Congress shall make no law in the establishment basically in the favor of the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Okay, this is part of the First Amendment. Then, of course, the second part of that First Amendment deals with free press and free speech and so forth and so on. Okay, because that's very critical. Not only should one be free to worship according to the dictates of his own conscience, but he should be also free to express that freely. Okay, without you know uh, someone using the sword to uh, you know execute what they believe to be correct in regard to religious matters. Okay, and so this is what I mean by Protestantism. All right, so because I know sometimes when we think Protestantism, we think Martin Luther, the Reformers, Christians. Okay, but it's broader than just that. It's the separation between religion and the state. So not only is that great for Christians, but that's great for Buddhists. That's great for Muslims. That's great for atheists who don't want to have anything to do with religion. Okay, and so it leaves the conscience of man entirely free. All right, and so we're going to be touching on Protestantism and this ideal, and because that's the main principle that we're dealing with right now. But notice this: it says that these republicanism and Protestantism, these principles are the secret of its what? Power and prosperity. Oh, it's free market capitalism. That's the secret of America's prosperity and its power. Don't get me wrong. Does free does a free market economy help? Absolutely. But in fact, the ideal of republicanism and Protestantism, the separation between religion and the state, as well as government by the consent of the governed, opened up the doorway for what we call a free market economy. Okay, those two principles are foundational to a free market economy. Without those two principles, it's very, very difficult to have a functioning free market economy. Okay, a functioning one. All right, you can have one in theory and call it can be something else, and you can call it a free market, but it may not be a free market in practice because those principles are not in place. So, yes, so even the free market economy that we see is a result of these two principles, and therefore it's part of the secret of this nation's power and prosperity. All right. I don't know if V wants to share anything on in regard to that.
Not yet.
Okay. So we're moving forward. I should have just hid a lot of these slides because I thought I was gonna go through them, but I'm not gonna go through it. Um, and we were touching on Rome, okay? And Rome was a republic, and so now we're going to look at Rome, and Rome did something specific. It destroyed the mighty and the holy people. During this time, ancient Rome, during the time of ancient Rome, it did this, okay? And this actually was fulfilled during a specific time. I don't know if you are familiar with what time this was fulfilled when the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire actually decimated the mighty and the holy people.
So I have an idea. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because I am
Oh,
obsessed with British history. Oh my goodness. So, I think that the time that the Roman Empire destroyed God's great and mighty people was during the dark times. You know what I'm trying to say, right?
the Dark Ages.
The Dark Ages, yes. So there was a time when the all of the reformers, they were trying to spread the gospel, and then they printed everything, and then they were like, no, this can't happen. It's gonna kill
Yes.
you. They were
Mhm.
killing everybody. And so this is basically what happened. God's people were being killed because they wanted to be able to read the Bible and they couldn't. Am I correct? Hello?
Hello. Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Were you speaking? I couldn't hear you before.
Okay. 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 Can you see my screen? Okay, good. You can
Now
see.
I can, yes.
Okay, good. All right. So in response to um the thing now, you're right in the sense of the event, but the time period is different. That's paper Rome.
That's still paper room?
Yes, yes, yeah. Now, paper Rome, of course, the Roman Empire. There's an ecclesiastical Roman Empire, which is paper Rome as an ecclesiastical empire. That's the time frame in which we're living. And then there's the Roman Republic,
Okay.
ancient Rome, pagan Rome, the pagan Roman Empire. What I'm speaking about is the Rome as a republic. That's ancient Rome during that time. So the Protestants and the Reformers came hundreds of years after that. Okay,
Oh,
after this
yes.
period that I'm speaking about. So there's a specific event that transpired under the Roman Republic, and it says that they shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Now, here's the thing:
Oh,
this prophecy applies. This prophecy also applies to the papal Rome. Okay,
wait,
but this is dealing with something else
wait.
that trans. Yes, okay.
I think I'm getting onto it now. Okay, so in during ancient Rome, there was this guy called Constantine, and he was trying to appeal to the people then, and they wanted their pagan practices, but the church. So first Christianity was illegal,
Mm-hmm.
and then it became legal. So first that was the only religion that was illegal, and then this other guy was the next guy that came into power. He's like, you know what, no, Christianity is going to be the only one that's legal. All the other ones not legal anymore. But they tried to change Christianity after that, and this affected Christians, and it led to the destruction of God's people. Am I correct?
Mm. Now, here's the thing. This applies also to that, but it's even earlier.
Even earlier. Ooh, pray tell, pray tell.
Okay. Okay. So the specific event that I'm talking about with the ancient Roman Empire is the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 that that Christ spoke about. Okay. Okay. And so this is from, I don't know if anybody's familiar with this picture. I don't know if you're familiar with who this is. I don't know if you've ever seen this person's face. Okay. No, 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 no. Okay. So this individual was a prolific student of history as well as prophecy. So he would study world history very diligently, and then he will also look at the Bible and see where the Bible applies and how the Bible guides in world history. And his name was Uriah Smith. Okay, he's very known for writing a book called Daniel and the Revelation. Okay, um, which quite frankly is there's still a very much a lot of information. The majority of the information that he gives that he shares in the book is correct. Okay, the majority of it. All right, there's some things that obviously he didn't necessarily understand correctly, but there are the majority of the things that he shared in the book is extremely accurate. Okay, and this is what he states. Um, it says, and he shall destroy wonderfully. He says, the Lord told the Jews by the prophet Ezekiel that he would deliver them to men who were skillful to destroy. This is in Ezekiel chapter 21, verses 31. He says, how full of meaning is such a description and how applicable to the Romans? It says, in taking Jerusalem, they slew 1,100,000 Jews and made 97,000 captives. And so wonderfully did they destroy this once, notice what words he used, once mighty and holy people. Okay. This is from Daniel in the Revelation. All right. Now I don't know if you're familiar with this picture. V,
Oh
want to
yeah,
make a guess? Huh?
Ellen G. White.
Yeah, yeah. This is another historian, another prolific writer. In fact, out of both male and females, Christian writers, as a male and female, not just Christian, nonfiction writers. Um, she is the most prolific writer, nonfiction writer, in American history. Okay, the most prolific. Like there are prolific writers that have written many works, and they're much more well known than this author, but she is the most prolific as far as how much content she actually produced from writing. Okay. And notice what she states here. She says, after the destruction of the temple, the whole city soon fell into the hands of the Romans. The leaders of the Jews forsook their impregnable towers, and Titus found them solitary. Titus is the general over Rome at this time. He gazed upon them with amazement and declared that God had given them into his hands, and for no engines, however powerful, could have prevailed against those stupendous battlements. Both the city and the temple were razed to their foundations, speaking about Jerusalem. And the ground upon which the holy house had stood was plowed like a field. In the siege and the slaughter that followed, more than 1,000,000 of the people perished. Then it says the survivors were carried away as captives, sold as slaves, dragged to Rome to grace the conqueror's triumph, thrown to wild beasts in the amphitheaters, which looks a lot like our football stadiums and basketball stadiums today, and soccer stadiums. The amphitheaters look a lot like that, or scattered as homeless wanderers throughout the earth. Okay, the captives. All right, and so this speaks about the destruction of the mighty and holy people. Now, I mean, basically, when they destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70, after that time, there was not a nation known as Israel until 1948, I think, when the nation that we call Israel today was established, was in 1948. Okay, so almost 2,000 years after the fact, the nation of Israel was established. So after AD 70, the Jews had been spread across the world, some taken captives to Rome and died in Rome. Others were perished when Rome actually in AD 70 destroyed Jerusalem. And so there, I mean, the Jewish nation was pretty much non-existent as a nation until 1948. Okay. Uh, and so this AD 70 event that destroyed the mighty and holy people, is right. The word destroy is a very accurate description. It destroyed the Jewish nation as a nation. Okay. For nearly 2,000 years. Okay.
Wow.
Now, here in now here's a few, and I'm wondering, okay, we have about 20 minutes, so well, a little bit under 20 minutes, so we have a little bit of time. I just want to make sure that we have the time to go through it. Do you want to have any statements that you would like to make, V?
Okay, so when you brought up the nation of Israel being reestablished in 1948,
I don't quote me on the year. I think it was 1948. It could have been somewhere in the 1940s. I can't remember exactly which year.
I just a side question.
Yeah.
Is the reestablishing of the nation of Israel a part of biblical prophecy? Because I also want to think that something that happened, I don't remember if it's American history or German history, but something happened
Um,
where they were reestablished as a nation. Or was it the fact, because I think it has something to do with Gaza. They were reestablished and then they were told to stay there in that strip of land. That
okay.
had anything to do with biblical prophecy.
For right now, I'm going to say there is a biblical prophecy that involves Jerusalem that has not yet been fulfilled. Okay. Uh, it's the only verse that hasn't been fulfilled in this specific chapter. Every other verse has been fulfilled in the chapter. It's in Daniel chapter 11, which is probably the most overlooked chapter amongst prophecy students. Is Daniel chapter 11 because the whole prophecy is literal. In verse 45, it involves Jerusalem. I won't go into the details of it, but it's not necessarily, its focus is not necessarily the establishment of Israel. That's not the focus of Daniel chapter 11, verse 45. It's an event that involves the geographical location of Jerusalem. Okay. I won't go into the details, but there is a relation to do with it, but it's not necessarily directly dealing with the establishment or the reestablishment of Israel. So, no, in one sense, no, there is no prophecy that deals with the reestablishment of Israel. And I'm talking about prophecy, I'm not talking about historically. Okay.
Okay.
There has been prophecies historically that dealt with the reestablishment of Israel as a people. For example, Babylon, when Babylon came, they destroyed Jerusalem, took the people captive, and the Lord gave 70 years before they would be able to go back to Jerusalem. The Jews would be able to go back to the Jerusalem. That and then they had to rebuild, and it took years, several years, and they eventually was able to rebuild not only Jerusalem but the temple. Okay, they had to rebuild the temple. The that had to do with the reestablishment of Jerusalem, but that's even before Rome. So, in short, no, there's no prophecy right now that's dealing with the reestablishment of Jerusalem in the future. Okay, and or in 1948, 1948 doesn't mark a prophetic point in the Bible in regard to the reestablishment of Israel. No.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right. So notice this. Notice what it states here. This is Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 and 16. It says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, we're going to find out what that abomination of desolation is, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So this is speaking about the AD 70 event. Jesus is asked, this is the words of Jesus, and he's speaking about what would happen in the future in AD 70. Okay. And this is Mark chapter 13. And notice how Mark explains it. He says, but when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, again, we want to find out when this abomination of desolation was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that reads understand, then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay. So again, we go flee into the mountains. Then it says, and let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein to take anything out of his house, and let him that is in the field not turn back again, but to take up his garment. Then it goes on to say in Luke 21, same passage. Now it tells us what the abomination of desolation is. It says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, speaking about the Roman armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh or near. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. Okay, all right. Now this is speaking about a certain event. All right, and this event actually that the Lord is speaking of here, he's speaking of an event that happened in 67 AD. Okay, there was a general before Titus that came in 67 AD, and they surrounded Jerusalem. They seized Jerusalem with the armies. And you know what they did afterwards, V?
What?
They just dispersed. They left with no explanation, no word whatsoever. They took siege as if they were going to take Jerusalem, and then they left. Jesus says that when you see this, Those who are in Jerusalem, those who are in Judea, when you see it, flee. So those who believed the words of Jesus, they fled. What happened? 70 AD came. AD 70 came. This time the Roman armies came, and this time with a different general, Titus. They came and they surrounded Jerusalem. And this time they didn't leave. They surrounded Jerusalem for a long period of time. The people lost food. They started starving. They ate other people, honestly. Yes, they went. Yeah. Yeah. So it was pretty vicious. And then they took Jerusalem. And it was a slaughter that transpired as a result of the Roman armies entering into Jerusalem then. So there was two sieges. This siege that he's speaking of happened in AD 67, I'm sorry. And then he says flee. And then afterwards, the second siege came from Rome. And then Rome was destroyed. Now, why am I touching on these two sieges? Notice what it states here. All right. This is written, of course, by Ellen White. And notice what it states here. The time is not far distant when, like the early disciples, we shall be forced to seek a refuge in desolate and solitary places. As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for flight to the Judean Christians, so, or in like manner, the assumption of power on the part of our nation in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. Now, mark this. I want us to focus on this. How does the nation assume? How does our nation, or the United States, is speaking about the United States because Ellen White was from the United States. It says the part about the assumption of power. What signifies the assumption of power on the part of this nation? Notice this: by having a decree that enforces the papal Sabbath.
Legislation.
Says, yes, and we're going to study. We're going to look at history. There is, and we're going to see in history if there was any time that the United States enforced a Sunday legislation. We're going to see if they done it. Not try to enforce one. Did they enforce one? Okay. And it states here, it says, in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning. This will be a warning to us. It will then be time to leave the large cities, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes and secluded places among the mountains. Okay. So it says if we see this first, it will be a warning to us. And then that warning will be to leave the large cities, much like Judean Christians was to flee into the mountains. Okay. And so we're going to see whether this has transpired. So question, has there been any action by the United States which by the assumption of power in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath, there has been given a warning to us? That's the question we really want to ask ourselves. Okay, remember Revelation 13:11 says, and I beheld another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And in great controversy, it states this: the speaking of the nation, meaning speaking as a dragon, is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. Now, I want to be clear. It did not say executive authorities here, okay? Because I know, in America, people are, just fascinated, hypnotized by the executive branch, okay?
I know. The real decision making happens in the lower branch, the legislative branch, and in the judicial branch. People in politics get so caught up with the executive branch that they vote only for the executive branch power, but they forget to vote for the legislative branch, and things are being spoken into law that people don't realize behind the scenes because people just overlook the legislative branch, which is where it all happens.
100%. Okay, 100%. So the question is have we already seen the papal Sabbath? And what is the papal Sabbath? Well, the Catholic Church, the papacy, states themselves, and I'm not going to go to the documents here, but they state themselves that they are responsible for changing the Sabbath from the seventh day to the first day of the week. That whosoever observes the Sunday Sabbath is observing a decree not enforced by God, or or a law that is not established by God, but established by the papal church. And therefore, whosoever recognizes Sunday Sabbath is recognizing the authority or acknowledging the authority of the papal church. Okay. And so let's see if there's a Sunday decree that has been established in the nation. Let's consider it. Let's see. Okay. All right. Now notice this. Oh, just use AI. Did Congress make the decision to officially discontinue Sunday mail delivery, or was it the executive branch? It says, great question. The decision to officially discontinue regular Sunday mail delivery in the United States was made by what? Congress. It doesn't say the president and his administration, the executive branch, Congress. What is Congress in the branch? For those who know the balance of power between the executive, legislative, and judicial authorities, which branch is Congress falls under? Do they fall under the legislative, judicial, or executive authority? V?
Can you please repeat that? Sorry.
I said, what branch does Congress fall under? Is it legislative, judicial, or executive authority?
Oh, legislative authority.
Legislative authority, absolutely. So it states here. So it came from the legislative branch. Okay. So this is the Sunday decree that was enforced, and this was enforced in what year? We're going to find out what year this was enforced. It was enforced in 1912. So we already have Congress passing a legislation that prohibited, well, specifically their mail delivery service on Sunday. Okay. And it says that the law was included in the Post Office Appropriation Act for that year in 1912, and it was signed into law by the president, making it a joint action between the legislative and executive branches, but the decision-making authority rested with Congress. So we already have the warning. The warning was already given in 1912. Okay. And so basically that warning is for us to leave the large cities, okay, and move into smaller ones, preparatory for eventually moving out into the country amongst the mountains, okay? And so that's been in 1912. So the second time that a decree comes, guess what? That's it. That's it. That second decree will not come as a warning, okay? It will not come as a warning. And I'm talking about a decree at a national level. I'm not talking about the state level, at the national level. Okay. This is the only decree. Huh?
Can I interject?
Yes, go ahead.
I think what's happening in our government is priming our nation for it. It's coming soon. Our current administration wants the Ten Commandments to be put in schools. I mean, but which version of the Ten Commandments are we talking about? The original Ten Commandments that's in the King James Version, or the version of the Ten Commandments that's been revised by the Catholic Church that that augments the first set of commandments that talks about man's relationship with God, as it refers to worshiping images. And so as we see, like our administration wants our nation, our schools to be more Christ-centered. As we can see, what's happening right now is the integration of church and state by enforcing the Ten Commandments in schools. Now, to Christians like us, oh my goodness, surface level, it's amazing. But which version of the Ten Commandments are children learning? And it's priming us, because once our nation gets used to the inclusion of church and state, then we won't be surprised when this starts happening. The sieging starts to happen.
Right. So we do have state situations. There's a few states, especially in the South, that have introduced the ideal of a 10 commandments being enforced at a state level. Um, but and I'm going to mainly what we're focusing on at this time is the national level. And so what we're going to see is something that is going on currently. Okay. This was written by what you call the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative branch think tank. And they actually advise the administration of the president, the president and his administration. Okay. And this is what they had, and they had something called their mandate for leadership, okay, or Project 2025. It's known more properly as Project 2025, and they advised the Sabbath rest and for Project 2025, but they've done something recently this year, as of January the 8th, okay, earlier this month. They actually have sent. This is what they sent to legislators, the national legislators, Congress, as of January 8, 2026. Support for a uniform day of rest. Okay? And then they give their reasons why. As zoning laws allow a community to determine where one can operate certain businesses, blue laws, or Sunday blue laws, in other words, reflect the local judgments as to when one can operate certain businesses. In the case of McGowan versus Maryland, 1961, the Supreme Court held by an 8-1 vote that Sunday closing laws that include the purpose of providing a uniform day of rest are constitutional and can accommodate the fact that the majority of people who take a day of rest for religious reasons do so on Sundays. Massachusetts, for example, requires that every employer of labor engaged in carrying on any manufacturing, mechanical, or mercantile establishment or workshop shall allow every person at least 24 consecutive hours of rest in every 7 consecutive days. Yeah, but if Massachusetts is not actually saying that it has to be Sunday on that, that's different. And so they say, so because they're supporting a uniform day of rest, meaning one day for everybody. Okay. And then notice what it goes on to say. Day of rest laws limiting commercial activity are usually found in less densely populated counties, although restrictions on alcohol sales are more widespread. Okay. I'll skip down to the next paragraph. It says a uniform day of rest that limits commercial activity can provide temporal boundaries that help communities to set aside time for religious observance, family gatherings, outdoor activities, and rest. A stable base of research shows that these practices correlate with better mental health, stronger social bonds, and more stable family structures. Okay.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
The Sabbath day that God has called us to keep is under attack. And in the Catholic Catechism, they say, we gather on the day of the sun, for it is the first day after the Jewish Sabbath, but also the first day when God, separating matter from darkness, made the world. And on this same day, Jesus Christ is our Savior, rose from the dead. So they even acknowledge that this Jewish Sabbath, which is what God called us to follow, is different from what they put, which is Sunday. Oh my goodness, it's getting so late. I really love this, though. I love this Bible study.
So we're going to close, but I'm going to read this last part right before we close. It says this. Despite today's on-demand culture, this is what they wrote to the legislators this month, gave to the legislators earlier this month. On today's demand culture, the U.S. Postal Service does not deliver regular mail on Sundays. I already stated in 1912 that law was established. Now they're using this as the basis to expand that law from the Postal Service to everybody else. To everybody else. All right. So this is going on currently, but next week we're going to extend beyond